In 1944, the U.S. government published a document that was never supposed to be seen by the public. It was called the Simple Sabotage Field Manual. Written by the OSS, the wartime predecessor to the CIA, it was a handbook distributed to ordinary civilians inside enemy-occupied countries. The goal was simple: teach normal people how to silently destroy organizations from the inside without anyone noticing. No bombs, no weapons, no violence, just behavior. And the number one sabotage technique in the entire manual, the one the OSS considered the single most effective way to cripple any organization, was this: hold more planning meetings, encourage lengthy discussions before any action is taken, insist on perfecting the plan before execution begins. Read that again. The OSS, one of the most sophisticated intelligence organizations in human history, identified excessive planning as a weapon of destruction, not a productivity tool, a weapon, something you use to make your enemy collapse from the inside. And right now, without anyone handing you a manual, you are doing it to yourself. This is not about planning being bad. Planning is not bad. A surgeon who does not plan the procedure kills the patient. A pilot who does not run the checklist crashes the plane. This is about what happens past the point where planning stops building and starts replacing. Because there is a line, and almost nobody talks about where it is. The productivity industry built an entire economy on the wrong side of that line. More frameworks, better systems, color-coded calendars, time-blocking templates, weekly reviews, monthly reviews, quarterly reviews, annual reviews, reviews of the reviews. And somehow, the people with the most elaborate fanning systems are also the people who feel the most stuck. That is not a coincidence. That is a mechanism. And once you understand the mechanism, the whole thing falls apart in the most useful way possible. The plan that never becomes the thing. Here is what nobody tells you about the planning brain. Planning feels like progress because neurologically it almost is. When you plan a task, your brain activates a significant portion of the same neural circuitry it would use to actually do the task. Researchers at UCLA found that mental simulation of an action fires the motor cortex in patterns that closely mirror actual execution. Translation: your brain gets partial credit for planning that it mistakes for full credit. This is not a flaw. In small doses, it is a feature. Rehearsal genuinely prepares execution, but past a threshold, the simulation becomes a substitute. Your brain has already experienced a version of the task. The urgency drops, the activation drops. The plan sits in the notebook and the task sits undone, and your brain genuinely does not understand why you feel stuck, because as far as it is concerned, something happened. This is why the most detailed planners are often the least prolific executors. They are not lazy. They are neurologically satisfied by a process that has not produced anything real. The OSS understood this intuitively in 1944. They didn't need the UCLA study. They just needed to watch organizations die. The productivity tax nobody calculates. Now here's where it gets worse. Every plan you make carries a hidden cost that no productivity system ever puts on the invoice. Psychologists call it decision fatigue. You know it as that feeling at 4 p.m. when someone asks you a simple question and you cannot form a coherent answer, even though you slept 8 hours and ate lunch. Your cognitive resources are not infinite. Every decision depletes them, including the micro-decisions packed inside planning. When you plan, you are making decisions. Which task goes first? How long will this take? What happens if this runs over? What needs to happen before that can happen? What is the contingency if the contingency fails? Each one of those is a small withdrawal from a finite daily account. Now here's the problem. You are spending that account before the work begins. By the time execution starts, if it starts, the cognitive resources required to do the actual work are already partially depleted by the planning that was supposed to help you do the work. The elaborate morning planning routine that feels so productive is, in measurable neurological terms, eating your best hours. Researcher published in the Journal of Consumer Psychology found that people who spent more time planning a task reported higher confidence, but demonstrated lower completion rates than people who spent that same time starting the task with a rough direction and adjusting as they went. Confidence went up, output went down. The plan felt like the work. The work didn't get done. What the people who actually ship do differently. Here is the pattern that shows up consistently across people who produce at a high level. Writers, founders, researchers, operators. When you study how they actually work versus how they say they work, they plan late and small, not early and large. The standard advice is plan your week on Sunday, plan your day the night before, map out the quarter before the month begins. Front load the planning so execution is clean. High output people do the opposite. They make the smallest possible decision required to start. Start immediately and plan the next step only when the current step is complete.
This is not disorganization. It is a completely different relationship with information. When you plan in advance, you are making decisions based on imagined future conditions. You do not know what you will know at step 4 when you are standing at step 1. You are building a roadmap to a destination you have not visited yet, using landmarks you have not seen, making turn-by-turn decisions from a desk. When you plan forward, meaning you decide the next move from inside the current move, you are working with real information. You know what step 3 actually produced. You know what is easier than expected and what is harder. You know what the work is telling you, which is almost always different from what the plan predicted. The plan made from the desk is a theory. The plan made from inside the work is intelligence. CIA analysts have a phrase for this: ground truth. Information gathered from the actual terrain always supersedes information modeled from a distance. Always. Not sometimes. Always. You have been modeling from a distance and wondering why the terrain keeps surprising you. The 2-minute rule has the wrong number. You have probably heard the 2-minute rule. If a task takes less than 2 minutes, do it now instead of planning it. Good rule. Wrong threshold. The actual research on task initiation, specifically the work on implementation intentions by psychologist Peter Gollwitzer, suggests the critical variable is not the 2-minute window. It is the gap between decision and action. Every gap between deciding to do something and actually starting it is an opportunity for the planning loop to restart. You decide to write the report. Then you think about the best way to start the report. Then you wonder if you have all the information you need to start. Then you wonder if you should outline it first. Then you wonder if the outline should be detailed or rough. Then you check your notes. Then you reorganize your notes. Then it is 11 a.m. and the report does not exist. The decision to start was made at 9 a.m. The gap between decision and action filled itself with planning. The planning replaced the starting. Gollwitz's research found that the single most effective intervention for closing this gap was what he called an implementation intention, a statement that links the decision directly to a physical action with zero planning between them. Not, I will write the report this morning. That is a plan. That is a target. But I will open the document and write one sentence the moment I sit down. That is an implementation intention. That is a trigger connected directly to a motor action. The brain does not get a planning window. It gets an instruction. The difference in completion rates between people who set goals and people who set implementation intentions was not marginal in Gollwitzer's studies. It was between 200 and 300%. Not because the implementation intention people were smarter or more disciplined, because they close the gap where planning sneaks in and replaces action. What to do with this right now? The goal is not to stop planning. The goal is to shrink the plan to the minimum viable decision required to start, and then start before the plan expands. Ask one question instead of building a system. What is the single next physical action? Not the project, not the goal, not the outcome, the next physical action. The one thing your hands or your voice or your cursor does in the next 60 seconds. Write that down if you need to, then do it before you write down the second thing. This is not a productivity hack. This is a direct application of how high output people actually operate versus how the planning industry tells you to operate. The OSS manual was published in 1944. It was declassified in 2008. You can download it right now and read the sabotage techniques on page 28. They will feel uncomfortably familiar, because the most effective way to destroy a productive person was never to overwhelm them with chaos. It was to give them a really good reason to keep planning instead of starting. You already know which one you have been doing. Now you know why.